The night was silent, but the silence was heavy. It was not the calm silence of peace, it was the silence that comes before danger. The human settler named Daniel sat inside his small wooden cabin. Far away from the crowded colony, he had chosen this lonely place because he wanted peace. He wanted distance from war and noise, but tonight peace was not in the air. The fire in the old stove crackled softly. Shadows moved along the wooden walls. Daniel was about to close his eyes when he heard it. A sound, soft but sharp, a knock. It came again, 3 times, slow and desperate. It was not the kind of knock a neighbor gives. It was the knock of someone afraid, someone begging. Daniel stood still, his hand close to the old rifle resting near his chair. His mind filled with questions. Who would come this far at night? Who would knock at his door in the middle of a storm? The wind outside was strong, carrying the sound of rattling metal sheets and broken branches. Yet the knock returned, weaker but more desperate. Daniel slowly opened the door. The cold night air rushed inside, biting his skin, and there they stood. A woman tall and fragile, with pale blue skin and long silver hair, her arms wrapped around a small girl. The child was trembling, her big black eyes filled with fear. The woman's voice cracked as she spoke. "Please, human, please let us in." "My daughter is freezing." Daniel's breath caught in his chest. He knew what they were, aliens, not from this land, but from a world broken by war. Many settlers hated them, many feared them. He had heard stories of violence. Stories of betrayal, his neighbors often said. Never trust them, never open your door to them. But now they were here, flesh and blood, shivering and weak. Not stories, but reality. The widow's clothes were torn. Dust and ice clung to her hair. She pressed her child closer, shielding her from the wind. "We have nowhere else to go," she whispered, her eyes shining with both shame and desperation. "They killed my husband, they took everything. They hunt us still, please, we beg for shelter." Daniel felt his heart pound. His eyes moved from the woman to the child. The little girl's lips were blue, her small hand shaking as she tried to hide her face in her mother's chest. He could almost hear her tiny heartbeat racing. A child, innocent, helpless. Did he have the strength to send them away? The storm outside screamed louder. As if the night itself was angry, Daniel hesitated. His mind pulled in 2 directions. One path was safety if he closed the door. The problem would end, but another path was mercy. If he let them in, he risked danger, he risked punishment. He risked his life for a long moment. None of them moved, only the cold air spoke. Then the little girl lifted her face, her eyes wide and shining like glass, looked at him. No words, just a look, pure and pleading. And something inside Daniel broke. The wall he had built around his heart cracked. He stepped aside, his voice rough. "Come in." "Quickly," the widow gasped in relief. Pulling her daughter close, she stumbled inside, her thin legs almost giving up. Daniel shut the door fast, locking out the storm. Inside, the warmth of the fire touched their frozen faces. The girl sighed softly, curling against her mother. The woman looked at Daniel, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel did not answer. He only stared. He knew this night had changed everything. This was not just a knock on the door. This was the beginning of something larger, something dangerous, something that might decide not only their fate, but his too. And outside, far in the distance, lights moved through the storm, cold, sharp beams of searchlights, sweeping the night, looking for someone. The hunters were close. Daniel stood in silence, the weight of his decision pressing on his chest like iron. The alien widow and her daughter sat near the fire, their thin bodies shaking as the warmth slowly fought against the cold inside them. The little girl's eyes closed halfway, her small head resting against her mother's shoulder. The mother stroked her hair gently, whispering soft words in a language Daniel could not understand. Daniel poured water into a metal cup and handed it to the woman. She looked at him with cautious eyes, fear and gratitude mixed together. Her trembling fingers touched his for only a moment as she accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice fragile, like glass about to break. He turned away, pacing the small cabin. His thoughts were loud, too loud. He had heard the stories. The patrols were moving across the land, hunting survivors of the last alien uprising. Any settler found giving shelter would be punished. Stripped of land, may be executed. The law was clear. No alien lives under human roof. Yet here they were, inside his home, breathing his air, leaving their footprints on his wooden floor. He looked back at them. The child coughed softly, Curling closer to her mother, Daniel felt a sharp twist inside his chest. He remembered another child, his own, years ago. Before the war, his little boy who had not survived the harsh winters of this broken land. That memory never left him, and now, looking at the small alien girl, the wound inside him stirred again. The widow spoke, her words careful. "My name is Solari," she said, placing her hand over her heart. "This is my daughter." "Anira," the girl peeked up at him, her eyes dark and wide, then quickly hid again. Solari lowered her head. "We had a family once. A home, but soldiers came. They burned everything. They killed my husband. They call us criminals, but we are only trying to live." Daniel clenched his jaw. The storm outside roared, branches scratching the walls. A faint light flickered through the cracks in the window. Moving, searching. His stomach tightened. The patrol, it was close. Solari noticed his tension. She rose quickly, panic flashing across her pale face. "If they find us here, they will kill us," she said. "And they will kill you too. Please, if you want us gone, we will leave now. We will take our chance with the storm." Her voice shook, but there was a fierce strength in her words. The strength of a mother ready to die for her child. Daniel stared at her. The words of his neighbors echoed in his head. "Aliens bring death, do not let them near." His hand touched the rifle leaning by the wall. His finger twitched, a decision to be made. One choice would end the danger. One pull of the trigger. The other choice would bind his fate to theirs forever. The little girl's small hand clutched at her mother's sleeve, her eyes glistening with silent fear. Daniel's throat tightened. He could almost hear his son's laughter in the room, a memory that no storm could wash away. He knew then, deep inside, he could not send them out. Not to the patrol, not to the cold. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Stay," he said, firm and sharp. "Do not make a sound." "Not a single sound." Solari froze, confusion and relief fighting in her expression. Daniel pointed to the wooden floor near the stove. He pulled aside a rug, revealing a hatch. He lifted it, showing a narrow, dark space beneath. "Go inside now." Quickly, Solari clutched her daughter, her eyes wet. She nodded and lowered herself into the hiding place, pulling Anira with her. Daniel closed the hatch just as the sound of boots crunched outside in the snow. A loud knock thundered against the door. Heavy and commanding, Daniel gripped his rifle. His breath slow, steady. The knock came again, louder this time. "Open," a harsh voice demanded. The fire crackled in the silence. His heartbeat matched the storm. Daniel glanced at the hatch hidden beneath the rug, then stepped toward the door. He unlocked it and pulled it open. Cold air burst inside, carrying with it 2 armored soldiers. Their helmets glowed faintly under the stormlight. Their eyes sharp and cruel, one raised a torch, shining it across the small cabin. "We are searching," he barked. 2 fugitives. A woman and a child, blue skin. Have you seen them?" Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened. He forced his voice calm. "No," he said, "only me here. Nobody comes this far in the storm." The soldier's gaze narrowed. He stepped inside, boots heavy on the wooden floor. The torch beam moved across the walls, the chairs, the stove, then closer to the rug. Daniel's throat burned as he watched, every muscle tense. The soldier paused, his light hovering near the hatch beneath the rug. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought it was over. His lie would break, the hidden space would be revealed. But the soldier only grunted, kicking at the rug with his boot, then turned away. "Search faster," the other soldier growled. "The storm grows worse." They stomped around the cabin, checking corners, then moved back to the door. One of them turned and stared at Daniel. "If we find you lying human, we will return, and you will hang." Daniel met his eyes without a word. The soldiers stepped out into the night, their lights fading into the storm. The door shut, the silence returned. Only then did Daniel release the breath he was holding. His hand shook slightly as he lowered the rifle. From beneath the floor, a faint sound came. A whisper, a sob, the small voice of a child trying not to cry. Daniel sank into his chair. Covering his face with one hand, he had made his choice. And now there was no turning back. The hunters were still close, and he had just made himself their enemy. The night dragged on slowly. Daniel sat by the fire, staring at the flickering flames. His thoughts were a storm louder than the one outside. Beneath the floor, Solari and her daughter remained silent, only the faintest breaths reaching his ears. He could still feel the heavy boots of the soldiers echoing through the wood, still hear their warning. If they came back, his life would be over, at last. When the sounds of patrol faded into the distance, Daniel lifted the rug and opened the hatch. Solari climbed out first, her face pale, her eyes red from holding back tears. Anira clung to her, her small body shaking. When the girl saw Daniel, she hid her face again. Solari whispered, "Thank you, human. We would be dead now if not for you." Daniel said nothing. He only placed more wood on the fire. He could not stop his mind from asking questions. Why was he doing this? Why risk his life for strangers? He had once sworn never to involve himself in the wars of others. And yet here he was, protecting them. Solari sat near the fire, holding Anira close. After a moment, she looked at Daniel, her voice soft but steady. "You should know why they hunt us," she said. "So you can choose if we are worth the danger." Daniel raised his eyes, suspicion heavy in them. She continued, "My husband was a scholar. He studied energy flows. He discovered something the soldiers did not want known. They killed him for it, and now they chase us to silence his work forever." Daniel frowned. "Energy flows," he muttered. His people had fought for years over fuel, crystals, and cores. A discovery in such matters could mean power, he asked. "Why would they kill for knowledge?" Solari's eyes filled with sorrow. "Because knowledge can free the weak and they fear freedom more than weapons." The child stirred. Whispering in her own tongue, Solari stroked her hair. Murmuring comfort, Daniel watched them, feeling the pull inside him grow stronger. He saw not enemies, but a mother and daughter torn apart by cruelty. The girl was no threat, her hands tiny, her voice soft. How could such a child be a danger outside? The wind slammed against the cabin walls. Daniel moved to the window, peering out into the dark in the far distance. Faint beams of light cut through the storm. Patrols were still searching. They would not stop until the widow and her child were caught. His jaw tightened. He knew this was only the beginning. Solari's voice broke the silence. "If we stay here, they will find us," she said. "If we run, we may die in the snow, but at least we have a chance." Daniel turned to her. "Run where?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered, "There is a place hidden where humans and my people once lived in peace. Before the war, I do not know if it still exists, but it is the only hope I have left." Daniel felt anger burn in him. Anger not at her, but at the world. The laws, the soldiers, the endless war that stole children from mothers. He thought of his son again, his laughter now a ghost in this silent cabin. His hand curled into a fist. He spoke through clenched teeth. "If they want you dead for knowledge, then that knowledge must live. Your daughter must live." Solari's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and respect. "You would help us?" she asked. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with fragile hope. Daniel looked at the child. Then back at the mother, he nodded once, firm. "Yes." But before he could speak more, a sharp noise cracked through the storm. A distant howl of engines growing louder. Daniel rushed to the door. Opening it a little, his heart sank. A patrol ship was landing not far from his cabin, lights sweeping the snow like hungry eyes. Solari stood holding Anira tight, fear etched into every line of her face. Daniel closed the door quickly. Locking it, he turned to them, his voice low, urgent. "They are back." The fire flickered, shadows danced across their faces. Solari whispered something to her daughter. Pressing her close, Daniel checked his rifle. The weight of it heavy in his hands, he knew that hiding would not be enough this time. The soldiers were closer, too close. They would tear the cabin apart. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of fire and the storm outside. Then Anira's soft voice rose, trembling but clear. "Mama, I am scared." Daniel's heart twisted at the sound. He knelt down, his rough voice softer than before. "You are safe here, little one, I promise." But deep inside, he knew safety was only an illusion. The hunters were closing in, and the next knock at his door might be the one he could not answer. The storm outside was no longer a shield, it was a drumbeat calling danger closer. Daniel's cabin shook as the engines of the patrol ship roared through the night. Lights swept across the snow like blades, searching every shadow. Daniel pressed his back against the door, his heart pounding like a hammer. Solari clutched Anira close, whispering in her ear. The girl buried her face into her mother's chest. Too frightened to move, Daniel raised a finger to his lips, warning them to stay silent. He blew out the fire with a sharp breath. The cabin fell into darkness. The only light came from the cracks where search beams cut through. A heavy thud echoed outside, boots crunching in the snow. The sound of men shouting orders carried through the storm. Daniel's hands tightened around his rifle. Sweat trickled down his forehead even in the freezing air. He knew they would not just knock this time. They would break the door. They would tear the walls apart. Suddenly, a fist slammed against the wood. Harder than before, the door shook. A voice barked, "Open!" By order of the guard. Daniel's breath slowed. He could feel Solari's eyes on him. Full of fear, but also trust, Anira whimpered. Solari covered her mouth gently. Daniel whispered, "Stay quiet." No matter what happens, he unlocked the door and pushed it open. 2 soldiers stormed inside, their armor glistening with ice behind them. A third swept a beam of light through the cabin. The torch hit the walls. The table, the cold stove. Daniel stood tall, blocking their view of the rug where the hatch lay hidden. One soldier stepped forward, his voice sharp. "We tracked movement near here. Tell us, human, have you seen them?" The alien woman and her brat. His eyes were cruel. His tone mocking. Daniel forced his voice calm. "I told the last patrol nobody comes this far." The soldier's gaze narrowed. He stepped closer, his face inches from Daniel's. "You lie," he hissed. "Your kind always hide them." The torch swept across the floor again. Lingering near the rug, Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears. His finger twitched near the trigger of his rifle. Solari held Anira tighter in the shadows. Her breath caught. A loose floorboard creaked softly beneath her foot. The soldier's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes narrowed. He barked, "What was that?" Daniel stepped forward quickly, slamming his boot on the wooden floor. "Rats," he said sharply. "This place is full of them." Nothing more. The soldier glared at him. Suspicion filled the air like smoke. But before he could move, another voice shouted from outside, "Captain!" "We found tracks." The soldiers turned. Rushing back into the storm, Daniel followed to the doorway. His eyes straining in the distance, he saw them. Lights moving across the snow. Men shouting. Rifles raised. They had found footprints leading away from the cabin. Daniel's stomach twisted. He realized with horror, they were old tracks. His own from the morning, but the patrol did not know that. They believed their prey had slipped past. "Spread out," the captain roared. "The woman and her child are close." The soldiers charged into the night. Chasing ghosts in the snow, engines flared as the patrol ship lifted again, the beams sweeping farther away. For now the cabin was forgotten. Daniel shut the door quickly, bolting it. His knees felt weak. He dropped into his chair, running a hand over his face. From the shadows, Solari rose, her eyes shining in the dim light. "You risked everything," she whispered. "You lied for us again." Daniel looked at her, his voice rough. "They will return, they will not stop." "You cannot stay here," Solari nodded, holding Anira. "Then we must leave." "But where will we go?" Her voice trembled with both fear and hope. Daniel stared into the dying embers of the fire, his jaw tight. "There are routes through the mountains, old tunnels, dangerous but hidden if you want to live. We must try." Anira lifted her face, whispering softly. "Will the bad men follow?" Daniel met her gaze, his heart aching at the innocence in her voice. "Yes," he said. "But we will be faster, we will be smarter." He forced a thin smile. "And I will protect you." The child clung to her mother. Solari's eyes softened. "Why?" she asked. "Why help us, when your own people would turn you in?" Daniel turned his gaze to the window, where the storm raged on. His voice was heavy. "Because once I had a child too, and I could not save him. I will not make the same mistake twice." Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the howl of the wind. Solari lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered something in her own tongue, a prayer perhaps, or a thank you. Daniel did not ask. He simply stood, loading his rifle outside. The searchlights grew fainter as the soldiers moved farther away. But Daniel knew this peace would not last. The hunters would return, stronger, sharper. Until then, he had one night, one chance to plan. The storm might hide them, or it might bury them. Tomorrow would decide which. The storm eased a little by dawn, but the silence that followed was even more dangerous. Daniel sat awake, his rifle resting across his knees. His eyes were heavy, but he dared not sleep. Every sound outside made him stiffen. Every shadow against the window felt like a soldier returning. Solari stirred from the corner where she had kept watch with Anira in her arms. The girl slept now, her small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Solari's face was pale, her lips cracked from the cold and fear. She whispered, "We cannot stay. They will come back. And next time they will not be fooled." Daniel nodded slowly. His voice was low. "You are right. If they search again, they will tear up the floor. They will find the hatch. They will find you." He looked at the child, fragile and innocent. "And they will kill us all." For a moment, none of them spoke. The weight of those words hung heavy. Then Solari reached out, her hand trembling. "You should not suffer for us, you should let us go." "It is not your fight," her eyes glistened. "We will not blame you if you choose to send us away." Daniel's jaw clenched. He stood and walked toward the window. He stared at the mountains in the distance, their dark shapes hidden by clouds. "If I send you away, you will die before nightfall. That is not survival. That is execution by cold." He turned, his eyes sharp. "And if I let them take you, I become no better than them." Solari lowered her head. She whispered softly, "Then why risk your life? Why choose us?" Her voice broke with pain. Daniel took a deep breath, his chest tight. "Because once, mercy was shown to me long ago, and I failed to hold on to it. I lost my son because of war and rules. I will not watch another child taken while I stand and do nothing." Anira stirred. Opening her eyes, she blinked at the dim cabin, then looked at Daniel. Her small voice trembled. "Will we be safe?" "Human." Daniel crouched down so his eyes met hers. His voice softened. "Not yet, little one. But I will do everything to keep you safe." The girl gave a tiny nod before resting her head against her mother again. Daniel turned to Solari. "We must move before the patrols circle back. There are old tunnels in the mountains. Few remember them now, but they once carried miners and refugees. They are dangerous, but if we reach them, the soldiers may lose our trail." Solari listened carefully, her arms wrapped tight around her daughter. "Then we will follow you," she said. "Even if it means walking through death. It is better than waiting for it here." The morning passed slowly. Daniel prepared what little he had. Dried meat, water, a blanket. He packed them in a worn bag. His rifle was cleaned, his knife sharpened. He gave Solari a heavy coat, one that had belonged to his late wife. She held it close, her lips trembling as she whispered thanks. When everything was ready, Daniel stood at the door. Listening, the storm had passed, but the silence outside felt sharp. He knew soldiers could be watching even now. Waiting, he breathed deeply and whispered, "Once we open this door, there is no going back." Solari stepped beside him, her daughter's hand in hers. Her voice was steady now. "There was never a way back for us. Only forward." Daniel looked at them. A mother and her child. And for a brief moment he felt something stir inside him. Not fear, not regret, but resolve. He opened the door. The cold air rushed in, biting at their skin. Snow stretched endlessly. But the mountains stood dark and tall ahead. Daniel led them out, his boots crunching the frozen ground. Solari followed close, Anira clung to her hand, her small footprints trailing behind. They moved quickly, every step heavy with risk. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller until it vanished into the storm. Ahead, the path climbed upward, twisting through rocks and ice. Daniel knew the patrols would return soon. He could almost feel their eyes searching the land. By midday, smoke rose faintly in the far distance. Black against the white sky, Daniel froze, pointing. "They burn homes," he whispered. Solari's breath caught. "Others like us," she said, her voice breaking. "They are hunting everyone." Daniel felt rage burn in his chest, but he pushed it down. "Then we must be faster." The climb grew harder as the light faded. Anira stumbled often, but Daniel lifted her onto his back. Her tiny arms wrapped around his neck. Her quiet voice whispered in his ear, "Thank you." His throat tightened, but he said nothing. He only walked step after step into the storm. By nightfall, they reached a narrow pass between cliffs. Daniel stopped, scanning the shadows. He whispered, "We will rest here, only for a short while." They gathered close under a rock ledge, the cold cutting through their coats. Solari held Anira close, her eyes never leaving Daniel. She spoke quietly. "You know they will not stop. They will hunt you now as well as us. You will lose everything you had." Daniel stared into the snow-filled darkness. His voice was quiet but firm. "I already lost everything once. What I have now is a chance to do something right." The wind howled through the cliffs. The darkness pressed around them. Solari closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Daniel kept his rifle ready, his eyes on the path ahead. He knew mercy had a price, and soon he would pay it in blood. The night was black as coal. The wind screamed through the mountain pass. Daniel tightened the straps of his pack, his eyes scanning the shadows. Beside him, Solari carried Anira wrapped in the coat, the child's face buried against her mother's chest. They had no fire, no light, only the storm to hide their trail. Daniel whispered, We must move before dawn. The patrols will circle back. They will search the cliffs if we are caught in the open. It will be the end, Solari nodded, her face pale. We will follow you, she said, her voice steady even though her hands trembled. They began to climb the narrow path. Snow crunching under their boots, the cliffs rose high on both sides, like black teeth against the sky. The silence was broken only by the howl of the wind and the distant echo of engines. Daniel's heart sank. The soldiers were near. Suddenly, beams of light cut through the storm, sharp and white. Daniel hissed. Down! They pressed against the rocks. Holding their breath, the patrol ship swept overhead. Its engines roaring, a voice shouted through a loudspeaker. The fugitives are close. Search every shadow. Solari held Anira tighter, her hand covering the girl's mouth to silence her small whimper. Daniel's rifle was gripped tight in his frozen hands. His muscles ached, ready to fire, but the ship moved on, the beam sliding away into the distance. They hurried along the path, Daniel leading. His eyes searched for the marker he remembered, an old crack in the cliff where the hidden tunnels began. His father had once told him stories of miners who dug deep here, tunnels that stretched for miles. Forgotten now, dangerous but secret. At last he found it, a dark gap in the rock half buried under snow. He pushed aside the ice, revealing a narrow passage. Here, he whispered. Inside. Solari hesitated only for a moment, then crawled through with Anira in her arms. Daniel followed, pulling the snow back to hide their entry. The tunnel swallowed them in darkness. The air was damp, cold, filled with the smell of stone and earth. Daniel struck a small spark with flint, lighting a stub of candle. The weak flame revealed walls carved long ago. Abandoned rails rusted on the ground. They moved slowly, every step echoing. Solari whispered, Will this lead us to safety? Daniel shook his head. It leads us away. That is enough for now. But safety was not so easy. From the distance behind, the echo of boots rang through the tunnels. Voices shouted in harsh tones. The patrol had found the trail. Daniel's pulse raced. Run! He barked. They hurried through the twisting paths, the candle flickering. Shadows stretched across the walls like claws. Anira clung to her mother, her small cries echoing in the dark. The tunnel split into two paths. Daniel stopped, listening. The voices behind grew louder. Closer, he chose the left path. Pulling them with him, the air grew colder. The ground slippery with ice. Solari stumbled, but Daniel caught her arm, keeping her on her feet. Suddenly a gunshot rang, the sound booming through the cavern. A bullet sparked off the wall near Daniel's head. He shoved Solari forward, shouting, Go faster! More shots followed. Sparks lighting the dark, Daniel spun and fired back, his rifle's blast shaking the tunnel. The patrol shouted, their lights flashing. He aimed again, forcing them to dive for cover. Then he turned and sprinted after Solari and Anira, his breath burning in his chest. They reached a wide cavern, the ceiling high above. A frozen river ran through it, shimmering faintly in the candlelight. Daniel cursed under his breath. The only way across, he muttered. The ice looked thin, cracks glistening, but there was no other path. He stepped onto it first, the ice groaning beneath his weight. He waved Solari forward. Stay close to me. Step where I step, she obeyed, holding her daughter tight. Together they crossed, each step trembling. The shouts of soldiers echoed behind, their light spilling into the cavern. Halfway across, the ice cracked. Daniel froze. Solari gasped, clutching Anira tighter. A jagged line split across the surface. Daniel whispered, Don't move. His breath came heavy. He shifted his weight carefully. Pressing forward one step at a time, the crack spread but held. They reached the other side just as the soldiers entered the cavern. Lights flashing, rifles raised, bullets shattered the ice where Daniel had just stood. The river broke open with a roar, swallowing several soldiers in freezing water. Their screams echoed as the current pulled them under. Daniel pulled Solari and Anira behind the rocks. Firing back to cover their escape, he shouted, Move, now! They scrambled into another tunnel on the far side, the darkness swallowing them again. Breathless, Daniel leaned against the wall. His chest heaved. Solari pressed her forehead to the stone, whispering thanks between ragged breaths. Anira's small arms clung around her neck. The sound of gunfire faded behind them. But Daniel knew it was not over. He whispered, They will not stop. Not until we are dead. Solari lifted her face, her eyes fierce despite the fear. Then we will not stop either. We will live. Daniel looked at her. Then at the child, his voice hardened. Then we keep moving, until they cannot follow. The candle burned low. Their shadows stretched long. Ahead, the tunnel disappeared into endless dark. Behind, the hunters' voices echoed faintly. They had escaped for now, but the chase was far from finished. The tunnel stretched on forever, twisting deeper under the mountains. Daniel's candle burned lower and lower, its flame barely holding against the damp air. Solari carried Anira close, the child's small body heavy with exhaustion. Daniel's every step felt like dragging chains, but he kept moving, his ears tuned to the echoes behind them. The soldiers' voices had grown faint, the sound of boots far away now. Perhaps the frozen river had slowed them. Perhaps it had swallowed more of them. Yet Daniel knew they would not stop. They were hunters trained to follow until the prey collapsed. At last the tunnel began to rise, the air grew colder, cleaner. A faint breeze touched Daniel's face. He felt hope stir in his chest. "We are close to the surface," he whispered. Solari's eyes lifted, shining in the dim light. She clutched her daughter tighter. They climbed until the tunnel opened into a crack in the mountain. Moonlight spilled through, silver and soft. Daniel pushed aside loose stones and pulled Solari and Anira out. The night air hit them like ice, but the sky was clear, stars burning bright above. For a moment they all stood in silence, breathing deeply, free of the dark. But freedom was fragile behind them. Faint lights glowed in the tunnel mouth. The soldiers were still coming. Daniel cursed under his breath. "We must move now." He led them up the slope. The path narrow and steep. Each step was agony, but they climbed. Driven by fear and the hope of survival, at the top of the ridge, Daniel stopped, his eyes widened. Below them lay a valley, and in its heart a small cluster of lights. Warm and steady against the darkness, not the cold beams of patrols, but the glow of fires, human fires. "There," Daniel said, pointing. "An outpost." "Old but still alive," Solari gasped softly, her lips trembling. "Is it safe?" she asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "It was built long ago by settlers who hated the war. Some say it became a place where outcasts gathered. If it still stands, they may help us." They descended quickly, slipping on the rocks. Anira stirred weakly in her mother's arms, whispering, "Light?" Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Yes, little one, light," he said softly. As they reached the valley floor, the smell of smoke and food reached them. Figures moved near the fires, shadows of men and women armed but not soldiers. Daniel stepped forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "We need shelter," he called, his voice rough. "They are after us." The figures froze, weapons raised. Then one stepped forward. An older man with a scar across his face. He studied Daniel. Then his eyes fell on Solari and the child. His expression hardened. "You bring aliens here," he said coldly. "Why should we risk our lives for them?" Daniel stood tall, his rifle across his chest. His voice rang clear. "Because they are not enemies. They are a widow and her child, hunted for nothing but survival. I have fought enough wars to know the truth, and the truth is this. Mercy matters more than rules." The outpost leader stared at him for a long moment. Then his gaze softened. He looked at the shivering child in Solari's arms. He lowered his weapon. "Bring them in," he said, "before the cold finishes what the soldiers could not." Relief crashed over Daniel like a wave. Solari sagged, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered, "Thank you," her voice breaking. Anira lifted her small hand toward Daniel. He took it gently, feeling its warmth against his calloused skin. They were led into the outpost, into warmth and firelight. The people gave food. Blankets, a corner to rest. Solari sank down with her daughter. Kissing her forehead, Anira smiled weakly. For the first time since Daniel had seen her. The sight cut through the weight in his chest. Daniel stood at the doorway, his eyes scanning the dark outside. He knew the hunters would not give up. They would return, perhaps in greater numbers, but for now, there was peace. For now, they had found shelter. Solari looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Why did you do this, human?" she asked softly. Daniel stared into the flames, his voice low. "Because once I lost my own family to the cold hands of war, I could not save them, but I can save you. That is enough." The night deepened. The fires burned bright for the first time in years. Daniel felt something stir inside him. Not anger, not sorrow, but purpose. He had opened his door to strangers, and in doing so he had opened his heart again. And outside, far beyond the mountains, The hunters searched still, but their prey was gone. Sheltered by mercy, hidden by courage, protected by a human who chose to defy fear. For in that moment, under the starlit sky, humanity proved its strength not through war, but through compassion.